Hello and welcome to Open Dialogue. I'm Noel T. Manning II. Really happy to have with us Michael W. Smith to talk about the new Lionsgate release, The Jesus Music, the soundtrack of a movement. This documentary is pretty fascinating. It explores the history of contemporary Christian music or Christian rock music. You decide what you want to call it. But it goes back to the roots, and it does it through archive footage, through photos, through interviews with dozens of artists, exploring why and how this happened. It also looks at influential figures who helped to pave the way. Michael W. Smith is no stranger to this industry, and he talks with us today, and I'm really happy to have him explain a little bit more about the impact of the Jesus music right here on Open Dialogue. Hey, Michael W. Smith, thank you so much for joining us right here to talk about the Jesus music.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
I got to tell you, Michael, I have had a connection to you in some form or fashion for decades. I worked at a Bible bookstore, music shop out of high school, covered Christian music concerts for my college newspaper, and even booked Christian concerts at my college when I was a student in the late 80s and early 90s. I worked at the Salvation Army summer camp in the early 80s. So the music and these artists featured on this Jesus music doc are like friends and a soundtrack to my early adult years and my teen years. So first of all, thank you so much for sharing this story with us.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. It was a pure joy for sure.
Well, I tell you, I was fascinated by so many different aspects of this documentary. And as I said, it really did provide just these memories that we're living and breathing. But something that fascinated me was the connection to Dr. Billy Graham's early impact and influence on this movement. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, yeah, it really kind of goes back to Expo 72, a big outdoor event, big Christian event that happened in Dallas, Texas. That was huge for him to sort of give it credibility, that he felt like this was important. This was going to be a catalyst in sharing the message of the gospel. And then, gosh, how many, two decades and 22 years later, all of a sudden I'm doing the first youth night with Billy.
Yeah.
And that's in the film, which that's a top 5 for me. That night was a game changer for me. And, so for him to sort of take down everything he usually does on a Saturday night, and we're going to have a rock concert with Michael W. Smith and DC Talk, was met with a little bit of opposition, and felt like he was making the wrong call, but he was adamant and felt like this is we have to do this if we're going to reach the next generation. And that night, I saw something I'd never seen before. I mean, to see that many kids come forward, to hear Billy give the message of all messages I've ever heard him give, and to watch us. That was just the beginning of many youth nights that I did with Billy.
I think for Billy, that was the authenticity of who he was when he was listening to God's call, no matter what opposition was against him. And this documentary, I think, also embraces the authenticity of exploring the good, the bad, and the ugly at times of this history behind Christian music. What are some of the things that you learned about yourself or about the history behind the Jesus music from participating in this project?
Well, I knew most of the history of how this thing started. I've kept up with this thing almost since day one.
Yeah.
I think I was 13 years old when I got that first Maranatha record.
Yeah.
The Everlasting Living Jesus Music Concert. That record changed my life. I think what was really good. What I think is endearing about the movie is hearing people be vulnerable and talk about the struggle, and talk about the adversity or somebody's childhood or somebody's addiction or somebody's divorce or whatever it is, and to be able to get on the other side of that. And, I think and I love that because I think a lot of people and I've never understood it, but I think a lot of people hold us to a higher standard, and which is probably not fair. But I've never complained about it. It is what it is. But I think when you hear people tell their story and how they overcame that, I think it gives people hope. Going with, if they can do it, then I can as well. So that's one of the beautiful things about this movie, is being able to hear the backstories of people's life and their journey through this thing that we call contemporary Christian music, and how this music has been a game changer, has changed millions and millions of lives. A 3.5-minute song can change somebody's life. That is astounding to me.
Do you think that's why this documentary is important for Christians and non-Christians alike, because of that vulnerability and those personal stories?
Well, yeah, I think you're going to have a lot of people flock to the movie theaters because this music changed their life. My hope and dream is that you're going to have, I'll go ahead and say millions, maybe millions of people are going to discover this genre for the very first time. How incredible would that be? I mean, that would be a dream come true, and how that can impact somebody's life and get them through whatever kind of stuff they're going through, and ultimately, have an encounter with Christ, So that's my hope and dream for it.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I'll just end on a personal note. I first saw you play live when you were in Amy Grant's band, and even have a backstage photo of the two of us with a solo tour from 1991. So it's pretty special
Wow.
to have this chat with you 30 years later. So I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your songs, and thank you for continuing to listen to God's voice. So thank you so much, Michael.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on again.
All right. I'd like to thank Michael W. Smith again for taking the time to speak with us about the Jesus music from Lionsgate. Michael is a multi-award winner, from Grammy Awards to Dove Awards to American Music Awards, and I just really appreciate spending this time with him, reminiscing and getting a chance to think a little bit about the impact that this type of music has had on my life, and it still does. For Open Dialogue, I'm Noel T. Manning II.